right. So David, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can everybody see that? All right, so my setup's a little bit different from the way I'm usually set up for doing these, but I'm just going to go ahead and go for it. All right, and so is everybody still seeing AI and software development in 2024?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So just a quick little bit about me. Some of you might have caught it earlier, but I am a blogger. So I blog about a lot of this stuff. I just did a big post the other day, kind of talking about a lot of the same stuff that I'm going to be talking about in the presentation tonight. So you can follow my blog if you want to read more about this type of stuff. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called the Polyglot Engineer, and I kind of cover topics that have to do with different technologies and getting those different technologies working together, as well as if you've been programming, let's say with C#, but you want to start learning Swift or Objective-C. I have a lot of videos that kind of cover those types of topics as well. And all this stuff you can find on my GitHub page. I have a lot of repos up here. And you can also follow me on x.com with either handle the Jacksnode for the Jacksnode user group or the Polyglot Engine 1 for my Polyglot Engineer channel. All right. So those of us, some of you might remember, there used to be a user group here in town called the Jax ArcSig, which was, kind of geared towards architects, software engineers that were maybe looking to become architects and kind of talk about different technologies in kind of a broad view. And CJ's taken over, and so there's going to be a new focus on the group. And one of those focuses is AI, which I'm happy about because that's a subject that I'm also very interested in as well. And so we're going to be talking about, what are some of the different directions, we're going to be taking with software engineering, what are some of the trends. And like I was saying before, it's like AI has gotten a lot of attention just over the last year and a half or so. I think mainly because of ChatGPT. But there's a lot of technology that's coming out at the same time that I think a lot of us will find fascinating and want to see how we can tap into. So stuff we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to go over kind of a brief history of artificial intelligence. We're going to talk a little bit about developer tooling. What are some of the different tools that we can use to build applications with AI in the applications. We're going to be looking at APIs that we can start to leverage as developers. We're going to be looking at large language models. There's actually quite a few of them now. And I'm going to be demonstrating how you can actually run some of these on your laptop or desktop. We're also going to be talking about prompts. And a short part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about LangChain. But like I was saying before, we're going to be doing a whole presentation in a couple of weeks on LangChain at Jacksnode. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we're going to cover a lot of that at that user group meeting. We'll also be talking about vector databases and AI safety. So how do we define AI? So there's this fellow, John McCarthy, who came up with this definition. He said, it's the science of engineering and making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. And so a lot of the current AI is being driven by, machine learning and deep learning. There's been a lot of improvements to machine learning and deep learning over the last couple of years. And I'm going to go into, why that is here in a minute. But machine learning and AI aren't necessarily the same thing, but there is an overlap. If you were to look at like a Venn diagram, they would overlap each other. And that's because a lot of the technology that's being used to develop the modern AI is coming directly from machine learning. So this gentleman here, his name's Alan Turing. He's a mathematician and computer scientist. Some people may know who he is, some people may not, but he was very influential for no other reason that he helped the British build the machine they used to break the German Enigma codes. And so, the Germans were using encryption just like, all, I think militaries at the time were using, some form of encryption to scramble their messages, make it very hard to read. And, the British found out that they could actually, they could break these codes, but, the codes would change after a day. So even if they were able to figure out a code by the end of the day, it was pretty much useless at that point. At least the cipher on how to decode the messages. So a lot of the work he did, was done for, basically building these mechanical computers that they used to, break the German codes. But he also contributed heavily to some of the first digital computers. And he came up with a lot of the theories that we use today now as, software engineers and computer scientists. And so when somebody refers to a programming language as being a Turing complete, basically what they're saying is that is a full-featured programming language. And he also came up with the Turing test. Now, the Turing test is something that's used to confirm whether or not something is a machine or whether or not it's a human being. And it's to try to help us determine what's the difference between a human being and a machine. And a little side note about Alan Turing, he was, kind of persecuted in the 1950s because the work that he was doing was so top secret. He hadn't gotten any fame or notoriety from being one of the people that helped win World War II, and he eventually died. And they're not sure whether or not it was a suicide or not, but if you go to Great Britain now and you get, like their 20-pound note, on the back of the 20-pound note, there's a picture of him. So they have the Queen on one side and they have Alan Turing on the other. So it's pretty important when it comes to computer science and to artificial intelligence. And so I'm going to play a quick little video here. Oops.
Do you mind if I smoke?
It won't affect the test. All right, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Just relax and answer them as simply as you can. It's your birthday. Someone gives you a calfskin wallet.
I wouldn't accept it. Also, I'd report the person who gave it to me to the police.
You've got a little boy. He shows you his butterfly collection, plus the killing jar.
I take him to the doctor.
You're watching television. Suddenly you realize there's a wasp crawling on your arm.
I'd kill it.
You're reading a magazine. You come across a full-page nude photo of a girl.
Is this testing whether I'm a replicant or a lesbian, Mr. Deckard?
Just answer the questions, please. You show it to your husband. He likes it so much, he hangs it on your bedroom wall.
I wouldn't let him.
Why not?
I should be enough for him.
One more question. You're watching a stage play. A banquet is in progress. The guests are enjoying an appetizer of raw oysters. The entree consists of boiled dog.
Would you step out for a few moments, Rachel? Thank you.
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed. How many questions does it usually take to spot?
I don't get it, Tyrell.
How many questions?
20, 30 cross-referenced.
It took more than 100 for Rachel, didn't it?
She doesn't know.
She's beginning to suspect, I think.
Suspect? How can it not know what it is?
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more.
We began to recognize in them a strange obsession. After all, they are emotionally inexperienced with only a few years in which to store up the experiences which you and I take for granted. If we gift them the past, we create a cushion or pillow for their emotions, and consequently, we can control them better.
Memories. You're talking about memories.
So one of the reasons why I played that clip, there's a couple of points. One is that, by the way, if you're not familiar with this movie, it's from a movie that came out 1982 called Blade Runner. The premise of the movie was that there are these androids out there that are called replicants, and they look and act so much like humans that it's actually difficult to tell the difference. And so the machine they used to test Sean Young to see whether or not she was a replicant or not, it was called a Wood-Kampf test. And it was kind of an interesting thing they came up with in the movie to try to figure out, whether or not somebody was human or not. And the reason why I decided to show that clip was because when ChatGPT was launched, I guess about a year and a half ago, that was one of the first things I noticed was that for the first time, people were having a tough time distinguishing whether or not who they were talking to in the chat was a human being or not. And so that's one of the I think that's one of the safety issues that's kind of cropped up as well. And so something else that's also interesting about that clip was with Sean Young's specific character. One of the things they did was they kind of pre-fed her brain with these memories, essentially data. And that's one of the things you can do with a lot of these models now, is you can actually go through and pre-train them. And so I thought this reminded me a lot of some of the subject matter we're going to be talking about tonight. But there's other examples of this in popular culture. There's, of course, the Terminator series, Skynet. Skynet was our artificial intelligence that the military turned on that turned against humanity and tried to kill us all. Another example is the HAL 9000 in the movie 2001. For those who haven't seen it, spoiler alert, the AI computer, the HAL 9000, tries to kill the entire crew. So obviously there's a pattern here, and which brings me to this Babylon Bee story that I saw. AI will be totally great for humanity, says man who never read a sci-fi novel. So I think the science fiction authors and stuff have definitely thought about the worst case scenario and written books about it. But I think everybody's still pretty excited about some of the things that you can do. But we'll go into a little bit more about safety a little bit later. So the current revolution really began in the 1950s. So the first AI that computer scientists started working on really goes back, over 70 years. And for a long time, there really was like a slow progress about this. And I remember I talked to my my dad, who worked on war game simulations in the 1980s. And, they were working with kind of like an early form of AI at the time. And, they had problems with the models. There's only so much they could do with the models. And there were advancements that came along the way, such as like fuzzy logic and, image models that make it a little bit easier, neural networks. So some of these things have existed for a while, but there really wasn't a lot we could do with them just because of the state of computing power. And so the big revolution that really happened, I want to say maybe a little over 10 years ago, was deep learning. And so deep learning really is the ability to kind of stack these different neural networks on top of each other. So you can design multiple neural networks and all having them work in conjunction with each other. And so that's been one of the big advances. But it hasn't really, the reason why it wasn't possible to now is just because the speed of computing technology. So the big change that really kind of happened recently was we started taking advantage of the GPUs. So the CPU, obviously, that's the original central processing unit that's we've all had on our computers for for decades now. But about 30 years ago, this is really kind of brought about by the gamers. They were trying to figure out, how can we get, these video games run faster in our systems? And so companies like NVIDIA started making graphics processing units, which is kind of like a co-processor to help the CPU, process a lot of this information. And there's also other examples. I think a lot of PCs that are being manufactured today have some type of NPU or neural processing unit. Google also has a type of processor they use in their data centers called a TPU or tensor processing unit. And there's also these field programmable gate arrays that are also available. And I believe Microsoft kind of made this popular with Azure. And there's actually going to be a lot more specialized hardware coming out. And so one of the things that are, I think, starting to happen now is that there's actually some capital actually going into building hardware specifically for doing AI. So look for that in the near future. So as far as the software goes for building this stuff, Python's kind of like the default language for machine learning and AI, which I think is actually a good thing because just as an example, my sister was teaching computer science in the school system over in England. And the language they use to teach students how to program is Python in England. I think they do that in a lot of other places as well. But it's also, very popular for doing ML, type tasks and for AI programming. So there's a number of frameworks that are popular for doing machine learning. Scikit, NumPy, Pandas are all popular packages that you can pip install. There's other one that's also very popular right now is PyTorch. There's a competing product to that called TensorFlow. And actually, both of those use similar data types. So I was talking a little bit earlier before about the TPU or the tensor processing unit. And so the tensor is kind of like the core data type that's used for working with machine learning models. And there's also a new company that just got started last year called Modular Incorporated. And I'll be talking a little bit more about them coming up. But there's new tools for this stuff coming out every day. So if you come across some tool and say, I don't really like Scikit, it's okay because there'll be, and then there are 10 tools coming out over the next week that you might like more. So the company I was talking about before, Modular, they came out with a new programming language called Mojo. And so if people aren't familiar with this company, this is a company that was started by Chris Latner. If you're not familiar with who he is, he's the engineer behind LLVM, Clang, Objective-C 2.0, and the Swift programming language, and now, of course, the Mojo programming language. So Mojo is essentially it's a superset of Python. So think of like with TypeScript, with JavaScript, TypeScript adds a type system for JavaScript. Well, Mojo does the same thing. Mojo actually adds a a type system that you can use with your code, and you can actually run Python code inside of it. But more importantly, it will run Mojo code in some cases 70,000 times faster than Python code. So a lot of that comes down to specifically what you're trying to do with the language. But they've seen huge speed improvements, and the reason for that is because when you go to run your programs or compile your programs, essentially, it's executing just like you would if you were compiling a C++ or a Rust program. So you're going to take advantage of the full power of the hardware that you're running on. And something else that they're also doing with that language is that they're setting up the compiler so that it will work not just with your CPU or your GPU, but with any kind of hardware or specialized hardware you want to use for doing this type of processing. And they're going to be open sourcing the language a little bit later this year. So that's something to keep track of. They're still kind of like in the beta stage for the language, but you can go to their website and request access, and they'll give you access to download the compiler. So that brings us to the real big change that's come up recently, which is generative AI, which is essentially is the ability to generate content. And so we're seeing a lot of this right now, obviously, is with OpenAI, with ChatGPT. So one of the things you've been able to do with ChatGPT is you've been able to have a conversation where you input text, and then it'll output a response, and you can actually have conversations like that. But they also have had, as CJ was mentioning before, this DALL-E image model where you can kind of describe like a picture that you want it to draw or to create, and it'll create images off of that. There's also services now that are actually creating video based off the same premise. And there's also speech to text where we can actually the AI can listen to speech and convert that into text. There's been versions of that around for a while, but there's been a lot of huge improvements that have been made recently. And there's also text to speech, which kind of brings us to the next subject, which is prompts. And so there's a new term some of us might have heard, which is called prompt engineering or prompt engineer. And it's actually there's a whole new career field that's kind of popped up around this term. And one of the, I think, things that's going to come out is that the people that really know how to get the best response or generate the best content based off of certain types of prompts. The people that are really good at creating those prompts and writing those prompts, they'll be able to make a career out of that. And so there's different types of prompts. There's the system, assistant, and user prompts. The system is basically kind of like an overall instruction that you can give the prompt or give your AI. And then the user is basically, that's a user prompt. That's you. That's us. And then the assistant, that's the response that comes back from, let's say, a large language model or some other type of AI model. And these prompts can actually be embedded and sequenced into an assistant if you want to do it that way. And there's frameworks where you can also kind of leverage and use these as well, which we'll get into a little bit later. So large language models, that's probably what's gotten the most attention. So ChatGPT, that is an example of a large language model. It's part of a family of AI categorized by NLP or natural language processing. ChatGPT is actually one of many LLMs. There's actually a lot of different LLMs now. And so we'll be demonstrating some stuff with ChatGPT tonight, but I'm also going to be demonstrating some stuff with some other large language models. And so some of these other models include Anthropic, Meta has Llama now, there's Google Palm and Gemini. And just for those that don't know, GPT stands for a generative pre-trained transformer. So try to say that 10 times quickly. So what does all this mean for software engineers? So I remember seeing an interview with Mark Cuban a couple of years ago, and he was talking, I was like, oh, software engineers, those people, their jobs, they're just going to be going away. All those people are going to be going bye-bye. It's going to be a job of the past. And one of the things I was kind of curious about was I started taking a look at some of these models and stuff for generating code and helping out with code. And one of the things I found is it's actually, it's gotten a lot better over the years, but it's in most cases, it's pretty buggy and won't run. Like if you try to get something just to generate some code and try running it, for me at least, it does not work most of the time. At least not 100%. There's some massaging you have to do to get that to work. But the first tool that kind of came to prominence with this was GitHub Copilot. That launched a couple of years ago, and that was actually based off of OpenAI technology. And I remember I started playing around with it, and I was pretty impressed with some of the stuff that I saw. But like I said before, it's like it's not perfect, but they're continuing to make improvements to it. And then Amazon also has a tool called Code Whisperer, and there's another one called Tab9, which do similar types of things. I think Code Whisperer, I think, works a little bit more on the command line, but I'm not positive about that. And then there's frameworks that leverage, large language models as a service. And so one of these we're going to be talking about tonight, a framework called LangChain, which allows developers to chain these large language models together with prompts, data, functions to kind of create a cohesive experience. Oh, I just lost my screen. Hold on a second. Uh-oh. Can everybody still see? Is everybody still there?
Yep, still here. We can see I see your title screen and the
Okay,
nope,
it's
you're
back.
good now. You're good now.
All right. Sorry about that.
Happened again too. Yep. Good.
Yeah. So what happens is every time somebody calls me, I get an interruption with my Zoom. So I apologize about that.
I think it's Skynet trying to
It could be
disrupt.
Skynet. Yeah. All right. So let's do the next slide here. So let's talk a little about APIs. So most of these companies and stuff that are developing, AI, they're really doing it as a service. And what they're doing is they're making their APIs available for us to use. OpenAI, I think, is probably one of the bigger examples of this because they actually have multiple models and they have a great API you can use for accessing their models as a service. There's official packages from them that work both in Python and also as Node NPM modules. There is a cost associated with using these services. So OpenAI is not free. They charge per token. And Google's an example. They also have an API similar to this called Gemini, which is a multi model type of solution. So in other words, it's not just a large language model, it's for working with all kinds of different media types. All right. So let's talk a little bit about tokens. So what exactly is a token? Well, tokens are very similar to words. In some cases, they actually may be words. But one of the things that OpenAI did with their model was they set it up so that tokens can only be of a certain size. So maybe, one syllable of a word. And so what will happen is when you are actually going through and taking text and converting it into something that OpenAI can use, usually a token will break down to like around 4 characters. Companies like OpenAI use NLP or natural language processing and byte-pair encoding to actually kind of translate that into a representative tool or model that can be used by their large language models. And so the rule of thumb that we can use is about every 3 words, there's 4 tokens. So that's around the rule of thumb. So if you have 10 words, it's probably going to be about 7 or 8 tokens. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. All right. So that brings us to the next part, which is custom GPT. So something else that OpenAI did recently was they made it possible for anybody that's a OpenAI user to go and create their own GPT. And what's pretty cool about this is that you can create one of these things with virtually no programming whatsoever. And so a lot of this is going to be coming down to, prompt design and what kind of data you can upload to it. But I think this is actually a good example of one of the things that we're starting to see is that they're making it a lot easier. You don't necessarily have to be a programmer to set up and develop some of these tools. And you can add your own GPT to their GPT store. So I imagine they're going down the same road as Apple and Google, where Google has a Play Store, they have a GPT store. And so one of the things I did recently was I created my own GPT and put it up onto the GPT store just to see how difficult it was, and it wasn't difficult at all. And so we'll take a look at that as part of the demo tonight. Something else they also released recently was an assistance API. So this is a new API. It's still technically in beta. It works with Python and has Python and Java libraries. Plus, you can also use a REST API for accessing it as well. This API actually has a process lifecycle just because of the nature of when you are prompting OpenAI, it may take a while to get a response back. And so they have a mechanism where once you initiate a request, you can go back and check to see whether or not that request has been completed. So for some people, that the user experience may not be all that great, but this is another tool that OpenAI has made available. So LangChain. So one of the things we'll be demoing tonight is this framework called LangChain, and it's a framework specifically designed for chaining prompts and large language models together. See here. So LangChain is an open source framework, but there is a company behind it called LangChain. They have libraries that are available in both Python and in JavaScript. But one of the things I've started seeing is that there's actually developers outside of LangChain have actually been going and they've been duplicating these frameworks in other languages. And so there is a LangChain framework for Java, which you can add using Maven. Something else that's kind of cool about these is that you can use these not just to chain prompts with LLMs, but you can also package it together with data and functions. And it also allows you to work with vector databases. If there's a particular language you like working with, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't start seeing other versions of this and the language of your choice. So vector database, what exactly is a vector database? Well, think of a vector database as a database that's essentially set up for storing and querying, these large data structures. And so OpenAI is an example with ChatGPT. They use a data structure that's called an embedding. And what the embedding is essentially is just it's a very long array of floating point numbers. And so what a lot of these vector databases can do is you can take let's say a blob of text, and you can create an embedding based off of that blob of text. And so what the model does is it'll go through and it'll take a look, and it kind of comes up with almost kind of like think of if every word in a language was sat in a different three-dimensional space, you can kind of represent that using an embedding. And so, different words may have similar meanings and they'll be kind of like grouped together. And so what's neat about that is that when you go and do a search, as an example, and you're trying to search through a vector database, you can actually use something that's called a cosine search to approximate or see how close, what you're trying to input into the large language model, what kind of text matches up with that. And so this is the kind of like the preferred database for working with AI, because it works very well with vectors and tensors. And just another note, there's a couple of vendors that are just doing vector databases, but if you prefer working, let's say, with a database of your choice, Postgres is an example. Has an extension that you can use for storing vectors and doing searches on those vectors. So there's a lot of different options out there. And I'd be shocked if I haven't looked at Microsoft SQL Server in a while, but I'd be shocked if they did not have a similar solution that you could use as well. So when you're using these vector databases, essentially what you'll wind up doing is kind of taking, let's say, text. Let's say you have a book or a large, maybe a bunch of text from a website as an example. And what you'll do is you actually will take that text and you'll split it up into sections, like think of like little mini blobs, maybe a paragraph or just a sentence at a time. And then what you'll do with that is you'll actually create an embedding based off of that. And then you can take that and you can store that in the database. And like I said before, there's something called a cosine search that you can do to kind of come back with an approximation of the text that kind of matches the closest. And these are used a lot in a type of application that's called a RAG application. So RAG, what does RAG stand for? Well, it stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And essentially what that's referring to is these applications where you may be tied to a specific, let's say, large language model, maybe it's a ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is only, has so much information up to a certain point in time. So I think, last year, I think a lot of people got aggravated with ChatGPT because it was only had data, I think, up until 2021. And it was, getting pretty late in 2023. And so they did a recent update where it's now updated at least at some point in 2023. But you may want to be able to ask questions or do some type of summation on something based off of information that's not in their, basically it's not in the model already. And so what these RAG applications let you do is you can actually go through and do a search for the text that you want to say, maybe get a summary or an answer on. And what it'll do is it will take the embeddings for that and pass it back to the large language model. And then the large language model can actually answer questions based off of that text. And so there's a couple of different ways of doing that. OpenAI makes it pretty easy where you can create the embeddings with their service and then pass those back as part of your request. Some people may not want to do that. There's another option as well where you can just take the text you want to summarize and pass that back in a prompt, and it can answer questions based off of that as well. And you can also use the same idea when you're developing custom GPTs as well. Something else that's also pretty cool is image generation. And so like CJ mentioned at the very beginning of this, that they have a model called Dolly. There's actually a bunch of other companies now that are doing stuff similar to this. So I think some of you might have heard of alternatives like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. There's also another one called Starry AI. And then last year, Adobe started offering a similar type of service that used AI. And one of the things that's pretty cool is that now you can actually create prompts to kind of refine and define, what these images look like and what you want them to look like. And something that's really cool is that I don't know how many people here use Photoshop. Photoshop's kind of like the de facto standard for doing image editing. There's been other companies that have tried to make competing products, but Photoshop, I think, is still kind of like the go-to application for doing any type of image manipulation. So last year, they released a new version that actually has a lot of these AI features now built into it. So they actually give you a prompt now that you can use for doing all kinds of different things. So one of the things I did is I found this. This is actually a real image of a landscape here. So there's a little field of kind of a forest just to the right of it, and then some mountains in the background. And so I opened this up in Photoshop, and just as an experiment, I kind of just drew a selection right there, kind of like the lower left-hand side. And here you can see I gave it a prompt where I said, hey, could you put a cabin into that field? And so it went ahead and it drew this, it rendered out this cabin right here. And so I think kind of looking far away in a landscape photo, that looks, looks believable. But this is actually how I did it. I actually just came through, kind of created a selection here. If you look at the kind of like the black and white dotted line that kind of goes around the cabin, that's a selection in Photoshop. And then so they have this thing, it's called a generative fill, where you just go through and you put in your prompt about what you want to draw in there, and it will automatically kind of render that stuff out. And it gives you different options. So a lot like Midjourney and some of these other tools, it gives you different choices. And so you can actually select, it's like, well, I like this one, but like, can we take this one and then, we're kind of refine this and do some other things? So that's one of the things that's pretty cool about Photoshop now, is that they've added this technology into their software. So another area is the text to speech and audio to text. And so OpenAI has a service that actually can create a pretty reasonable facsimile of a human sounding voice. So you can give it text and the AI will make it sound like a human being's actually saying it. So the web developers out there might know that there's an API that's already built into browsers for kind of reading back text that you pass to this API, but it sounds like a computer. It doesn't sound like a person. This technology actually sounds like a human being. And so there's a couple of companies now. There's one that's called Voice AI that can actually copy your voice, and you can actually use that to create like basically a computerized copy of your own voice. And so if you want to, let's say, with your own voice, have it come back and say something that sounds completely like you said it, but you didn't actually say it, this will do this. And a couple weeks ago, the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, was giving a speech at I think the World Economic Forum, and they had a company actually come in and redo his speech in English, but with his accent and his voice. So it actually sounds like the president of Argentina is giving the speech himself in English, but he didn't. He actually gave the speech in Spanish. And so it was pretty realistic. And so they had to put like a little disclaimer on the videos, like, hey, this is a computer generated version of him saying this. But it was quite remarkable how realistically, if you had just watched that for the first time, we would not have been able to tell that was not actually him speaking. And this is actually, they're starting to use this in special effects and movies and TV. And so recently, they were able to take Mark Hamill's voice and use it to make it sound the way that he spoke in 1983 when he was in the Return of the Jedi. And so they actually used Mark Hamill said the dialogue, but they reprocessed it using this AI. So he would sound younger. He would sound like he did in 1983. So those are some of the innovations that are happening with speech. So how are we going to use this stuff? How are we going to use this in our apps? And so I think that we're starting to see examples of this already, and some of the apps that we're already using. So GitHub Copilot is an example of something that where we're getting AI help with our coding and Visual Studio. I believe in Windows and Office, they also have this same Copilot branding with some other AI software that they're using with Windows. If you use LinkedIn or Meetup, you've probably noticed that they have these generative fill features for text fields. And so I was making a post the other day, and they had a little button at the bottom of the post that said, hey, do you want to have our AI generate a different version of this? I didn't use it, but it's there if you want to use it. Meetup.com is using it as well to help you come up with descriptions for your meetings. And we've probably noticed similar types of technology. So for instance, if you use Gmail, one of the things you've probably noticed over the last couple of years is that they've added autocorrects that not just correct your spelling, but also will correct your grammar. So that's another innovation that's come. Apple's doing the same thing with iPhone with the Message app. It also will do autocorrects of grammar and your spelling as well when you're writing. And that's one of the earlier versions of AI that I think a lot of people probably first experienced. So if you've used the spell checkers, the spell checker is technically that's a form of artificial intelligence. So that brings us to the kind of like the last focus of this presentation, is to talk about safety. So I think one of the concerns that I think a lot of people have had to do with, Skynet. Basically, we'll invent this artificial intelligence and then it'll try to kill us all. But I think there's other threats that are actually probably a little bit more dire. And so one of the issues that's come up pretty early on was this idea of hallucinations. And so if you've used ChatGPT at all, you've probably experienced this where you said, yeah, give me maybe the top 10 movies to watch in 1984. And it would have given you, it might have said, Ghostbusters or some other movies like that, but then it would have made up some. And so there's actually been a security problem that's popped up around this because what some, I guess, black hat hackers have figured out is that people will go into ChatGPT and they'll come across these hallucinations. And if you come across it more than once, that might turn into, let's say, maybe a domain name. So they'll create a domain name based off of hallucination. People think it's legit because they saw it on ChatGPT. And so this is an area where you have to be careful. So that's one of the safety areas of safety that we kind of have to worry about. Something that's also interesting about generative AI is that there's actually, it uses a lot of randomness. And so there's actually basically, there's something that's called temperature. And as you kind of bump up the temperature with these models, it actually introduces more randomness. And so the lower the temperature, the less the randomness, the higher the temperature, the more the randomness. And so that's something else also to keep in mind. And one of the things I kind of liked about the Google Gemini API, which just came out, is they actually have these different toggles that you can use. They have these parameters that you can pass in. They're like enumerated values where you can define different levels of safety based off of what these different parameters are. And so that's also something to take a look at as well. I wouldn't be surprised if most of the other vendors start offering a feature like that, where you can kind of control the different levels of how random or how safe. I think the bigger issue, I think the thing that politicians are really afraid of is misinformation or disinformation coming up, because one of the things that can happen, just like with with a website, you can go to a website and there could be information on there is wrong. The same thing with a large language model. You can go to a large language model, ask for something, and it can give you information that's wrong as well. So these are some of the things to consider when you're building applications around this technology. So with that, I'm going to give a quick demo here. So the first thing I'm going to do is we pull up my browser, and I'm going to come here to OpenAI. And if this is too small, I'll blow this up here so that people can read this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to the API. All right. And so one of the things you'll notice here when you're looking at this, I'm going to blow this up here so it's a little bit easier to read. Is that a little bit easier for everybody to see?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now I've got this blown up here. If you come over here and you look at the left-hand side, they have this little navigation bar here. And one of the things they have here is called a playground. And if you click on the playground, it'll come up here and it gives you these different things here you can play with. So they have a chat playground, they have an assistance playground, and they also have just a complete playground. This is just for simple one and done type of prompt and response here. But I'm going to go here to the chat. And so one of the things you'll notice here, if you remember from earlier in the presentations, one of the things I was talking about was there's different types of prompts. And so if I want to create, let's say, a prompt for, say I want to create an AI the assistant to answer questions about automobiles. All right. So this is basically what this is going to do. So I'm going to come over here to the user here, and I'm going to say, maybe what percentage of cars have 4 doors? And then I can submit that. And it says here that estimated 95% of all vehicles manufactured have 4 doors. And then if I want to, I can come over here, I could ask another question. What percentage of cars are painted red? And there it gives me an answer here. And so one of the things you can also notice here is that if you come over here to the right, you can see that there's different models you can select. And so by default, it's set here to GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is actually the least expensive model that they have. But you can also use GPT-4 or the GPT-4 Turbo Preview if you want. And so they also have here, like I was mentioning before, they have a temperature. So if you want to, you can come over here, you can bring that down. So if you want it to be less random in its response, you can turn that temperature down. Then if you want, you can come over here and you can turn that up. And so that's an example here of how you can control the temperature. So that's essentially the playground. And so one of the things that I would suggest is before let's say if you want to start working with OpenAI, one of the things you can do here is you can just come around and you can start playing around with their playground. And then it'll even come over here and it'll show you the code. If you want to see how you could actually run this code in Node.js, you can come over here and it'll show that to you. You can also come up here and you can change it to Python, and it'll show you the example here in Python as well. So very, very handy, makes it very easy to start using OpenAI very easily. That's probably, I think, the best thing about OpenAI is that they've made their API very easy to use. All right. So with that, I want to show something else here. So I think I have this open already. So I'm going to also blow this up so it's a little bit easier to read. Let me blow this up here. So this is actually from a presentation I did last year on LangChain, or more specifically AI, but we covered a lot of stuff with LangChain. And what I want to kind of show here is we were talking about RAG applications a little bit earlier. And so one of the things that's nice about this framework is that if you want to take, let's say, some text and turn it into an embedding, there's an example of how to do that here in this code. There's also an example here how to do a search. How you doing, Miles? And so if you want to work with a vector database, this is an example here how you can work with a vector database. So you can come over here, you can see how you instantiate a Pinecone client. You can come over here and you can do a similarity search with your vector database, and it'll return back some results. And then you can take that and pass that into what's called a DBA chain. And then you can, essentially pass a query back to open. In this case, it's using OpenAI, and it'll come back with a response. And then I've got some examples in here on just how to do like a basic GPT call. So here I'm using OpenAI, and I have a prompt template here. So if we take a look at this, this is just kind of like your most basic example here of how to, if you want to use LangChain to make a OpenAI call. So if we look at this right here, we can see that we're importing in the OpenAI model from LangChain. And then we're also bringing in a prompt template, and then we're creating a chain, an LLM chain that we can use here. So what we'll do is we'll create the model. Here is the template that we're going to use. We'll pass that template into the prompt using the prompt template here. And you can see here that there's a there's a variable that we're passing here. So the input variable here is product, right? And the thing that's important to remember here is that when I was talking about like this new profession coming up, somebody that's a prompt engineer, essentially what they'll do is they'll have a field where people can input in, let's say, maybe a question, but they'll decorate it with like a much broader prompt. And so this is an example here of how you can do the prompt. I'm gonna blow this up a little bit here. Can everybody read that? I want to make sure everybody can read that. All right. All right. So in this example here, we have this input variable for product. And then in the chain itself, we're going to pass in a product here called colorful socks. So if I come over here and I do run this GPT call here, we can see here that it comes back with a model here that my model has been deprecated. So I need to update that. So let's see if I can't make that change here real quick. Let's go back to OpenAI here. I'm going to see if I can just change this to GPT 3.5 Turbo and see if that lets me run. It's been a while since I've tried to run this. So, you know what? That's not going to work because I can't modify the model here. But this is how you would run something like this. Apologize for the interruption. So something else you can also do here is you can take some text and you can create an embedding. So if we come over here and we take a look at the simple embedding here. What this is actually doing here is that it's actually using OpenAI for the embedding. You don't have to use OpenAI for the embeddings. And something else to keep in mind with this is that there's a charge that comes along with that. So if you're going to take text and actually come back with an embedding, then when you're going to use OpenAI, it's going to cost, and you're going to be charged per token. And so there's open source alternatives. So if you're just looking to create an embedding that you can use to store in a vector database, you can do that and not have to pay OpenAI or another vendor. And let's see here. I think we also have a completion here. Simple. Oh, simple. That was simple embedding. Completion. So we try running that and see what happens. Okay. I think I need to update. I need to update this, but the code here is available up in my my GitHub if you want to take a look at that. We go ahead and kill that, and I'm going to open up this example here. So this example is actually a Next.js app that has a OpenAI component to it. And what this is doing is that it's going to create let's say a chatbot, and it's going to use a LangChain to actually go and communicate with OpenAI. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up. Now, if I come here and open up a new browser window, and I go to localhost 3000, this brings up a chat window here. And so I can come over here, I can ask questions. So for instance, like what are most popular kinds of socks? And here it's actually coming back with a stream response. And so that's one of the things I really like about this API as well, is it'll work with streams. So one of the things I think people have noticed is that a lot of times when you go and ask a question to ChatGPT, it doesn't come back with an immediate response. There's some services that are a little bit faster than others, but it may take a while to kind of like crank this up and use this. So something else that you can also do with this example is you can actually you can use this in conjunction with a vector database to create like a RAG type of application. And so one of the things that I decided to do is that as a pilot, I wanted to kind of create a chat that I could use that was aviation related, that if I needed to ask questions, or a flight student maybe needed to be able to ask a question, I wanted to be able to kind of like train this or at least work with data that is pertinent to what I want. It may not be available in the GPT model. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kill this, and I'm going to come back here and go out to my Lang chat folder here, and I'm going to change. I have a separate branch here for working with vector databases. And so the main difference here is that this is connecting to a Pinecone database instance. So if I go and run this now, I should be able to ask it aviation related questions. So I'm going to say, what is a pitot tube used for? And right there, it says that a pitot tube is used to measure the total combined pressures that are present when an aircraft moves through the air. It captures both the dynamic pressure, pressure due to motion, and the static pressure, barometric pressure in the local area. The total pressure collected by the pitot tube is transmitted to an airspeed indicator, or ASI, to indicate the speed of aircraft. That's exactly correct. And what I did to get it to answer that question was I actually used a document splitter to take a PDF file which had all this information, and then I split that up and stored it onto a vector database on Pinecone. And now when you go to query and ask questions, it will actually go through, get results back that match, and then pass that as embeddings back into ChatGPT. So, well, that's all very neat, and it's cool that you can do that. There's a cost associated with doing that. So Microsoft and OpenAI is they have this large server farm that they're running on Azure to be able to process and handle all this. But what if you don't want to be, I think some people may be concerned, I want to be passing my information to Microsoft, or to Azure or to OpenAI, right? And so one of the big changes that's come out just in the last year is that there's been a large boon of open source large language models that have become available. So let me go ahead and kill this. I want to show some of these tools and how they work. So I believe somebody mentioned Olama before. And so Olama is basically it's based off of a project that was done out of Meta, which they open sourced. And so now developers have gone through and they've actually done taken the model, and they've actually been able to retrain it for other purposes. And so there's actually versions of the model and stuff that are meant to work specifically with different code. And then there's also, just the basic model that you can use as well. So what I want to go ahead and do here is I actually have Olama already installed. It's a pretty easy install. So I'm just gonna come up here and I want to say Llama 2. Olama run Llama 2. And so I already have downloaded this model here. And if you look right over here, you can see that it just launched the Olama process. And you can see it's spinning up right here. And so now I can just come over here on my command line. I can start typing a message. I can say, what are most popular socks? And then it comes back with a set of answers. So saying athletic socks, cruise socks, no-show socks, ankle socks. And if you look at this is actually reasonably fast. So this laptop that I'm doing the demo on is not a super fancy, it doesn't have a ton of memory. I only have 16 gigabytes of RAM. And you can actually run Olama on Windows laptops as well as Macs. I will say this is running an M3 processor. So I am running Apple's latest silicon, and there are a lot of specifically, there's a lot of neural cores that are built into the M3. I'm not exactly sure how much they're taking advantage of that with the Llama, but the thing that's really cool about this is that you can actually take this and you can run this on your own hardware, right? And you can take the model and you can retrain it. And so there's a website called Hugging Face, and Hugging Face, what people do is they'll go and they'll train these models and they'll upload them to Hugging Face, and then you can go and you can download these models from Hugging Face and use them basically in your own tool like this. It doesn't have to be Olama, but it could be a tool similar to that. So something else I was going to say in addition to that is that, you can also, if you don't want to, pay, OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever for their service, you can actually spin one of these up and, run the service yourself. There's another tool called, I'm going to see if I can start up here. Let me kill this. By the way, this model that I downloaded is only, I think, a little under 4 gigabytes in size. So it's not even that big of a model. They have different size models you can use. And obviously it's gonna be more accurate the larger the model is. So let me do /by here. All right. So I want to see if I can't launch LM Studio. Yeah. So this is another tool here. Let me pull this up over here. And what's cool about this tool is, on top of being able to run these models, something you can also do is you can search. You can do a search here, and it'll come back with a list of all kinds of different models that you can come here and load up. And so what you can do, I already have one that I've selected and downloaded here. And this is based off of the 7B Llama model here. But you can come through here, and if you want to find something that's specific to, let's say, code, and be able to answer questions about code, I can come over here and I can do a search on that. And it'll come back and it'll show it shows, but you can see right here that it's got a warning here. It's saying that this is likely too large for this machine, right? So that's something that's also nice about this, is it lets you know, it's like, hey, maybe you should have been so cheap when you bought your laptop. So that's also something that's also kind of handy here. So I'm gonna come back here to Llama. And I have one of these already loaded up here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and select that. And let's see here, come over here, the chat. All right, and you can select the model you want to use. I'm gonna select this Llama model here. And let's see, I can ask it a question. What kind of... And this is not quite as fast as Llama, but it's still reasonably quick. Let's see, we got our user back. All right. So that is LM Studio. And let's see if I can turn that off. Well, I'll come back to that here in a second. Go back to the slides here real quick. All right. So I guess I should say that's pretty much the bulk of the presentation. I'm gonna have a lot more stuff on LangChain coming up next month. If people want to see that, I'll be doing that at the Jacksonville user group. But with that, any questions?
Well, first off, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is so valuable and so I just learned a lot. So thank you so much.
No problem.
So I would say my question to you, just kind of in practical terms, being such a seasoned developer, how have you, in your normal workflow, how have you utilized, AI to help you be more productive? Something like Copilot and things like that.
Yeah, so I think for a lot of tasks, I actually, when I first started using Copilot, again, it was free, and then they started charging $10 a month. And at that point, I found the service to be more annoying than helpful. So I turned it off and installed it for my machine. But that being said, one of the things that I came across recently, so my last job, I just started a new job this week, but previous to that, I worked at a company called Bill.com. And one of the tasks I had at that job was implementing the CI/CD system that they used for building all of our mobile apps. And because of the nature of that type of work, you're deploying stuff to servers and build machines, there's a lot of scripting that's going on. And one of the things that I'm actually not that strong on is Bash scripting. And I was having to do a lot of Bash scripting. So I was like, how do I do this in Bash? Or how do I do this type of condition checking in a Bash shell? And so I used it for the stuff that I was not super familiar with, but with the regular stuff that I was doing, like JavaScript and Swift and Java, those languages and stuff like that, I haven't really used it that much. But a lot of times, like if there's something like with a specific algorithm, a lot of times what's cool about a Copilot is that not only will it give you an example of how to implement a certain algorithm, it may give you different choices. They're all based off of ways that people have done it before. So I think the good example of that is the Fibonacci sequence. And so calculate a Fibonacci number. There's a couple different ways you can implement that. And so, one way is with recursion. You may not do we may do it without recursion another way. So what's cool about Copilot is you can actually prompt it to give you different examples of how to implement that method. And one of those methods, may have like a ON type of problem and scalability. So you might want to go with the other implementations. That's what's cool about Copilot. But for most of the stuff I use, I don't really use it that much. But stuff that I'm doing that's like a brand new, stuff I'm doing that's brand new. A lot of times, if it's a language I haven't worked with before, that's where I tend to use it.
Yeah, I've heard lots of good applications, especially I've heard the exact example with Bash and some working in the command line with Linux. Apparently, it's pretty good for that. And then as regarding Copilot, I heard that there were some recent improvements. I guess they switched models to GPT-4, and so ever since that happened, I don't know if that aligned with them starting to charge, but apparently it's vastly improved.
So on that note, if you don't want to pay for that type of service, but you want to have it, there's actually some models that have shown to be better or more accurate than Copilot. And they're open source. And so there's a plugin you can use with Visual Studio Code as an example. It's called, I think it's called Cody. And you can actually tie it in. You can actually, if you want to, just run it locally. You can launch one of these with Olama and then run it, locally when you're doing that. As you saw from that LM Studio tool, some of these are, smaller models, some are bigger models, and it's got to load all that up in memory in order for it to be, very responsive. And so to use some of these things, you do need to make sure you've got a lot of RAM. And if you have a machine that's got like a very quick bus between the memory and the CPU architecture, that also helps as well. One of the things that Apple does is they cheat because they put everything onto the same chip, right? So all the memory is all built in onto the same, piece of silicon as the CPUs and the GPUs and the neural processing units.
Cool. I'll open up for other people.
Hey, David, it's John. Hey, great presentation. Thank you. So I wanted to ask, I've got a bunch of different questions. I've been using GitHub Copilot a lot lately, and it's been helping quite a bit. It's definitely a lot better than the first versions where I thought the inline kind of suggestions were more trouble than they were worth. You kind of had to do like more, mental gymnastics to see if the suggestion was really pertinent to what you were trying to accomplish. But I think the newer Copilot, which is kind of like a chat box
Mhm.
version, is a lot better. But anyway, that's just some observation. The questions, I guess I got a lot of questions, but the most relevant ones I'm curious about to your presentation is you showed, I've used the paid chat GPT product where you pay like 10 or 15 bucks a month and you get access to the GPT-4 model, I think now. And but I saw, when I open the chat, when I open my browser and go to OpenAI Chat GPT in my browser tab, it just opens the chat app with all the previous conversations on the left hand side. I noticed you have like a whole playground and a lot of other access to things that I don't normally see or use in OpenAI. Is this like a developer account subscription or something that you have, or what was that?
Yeah, actually, that's how I first started using GPT-4, was that in order to have access to it, you had to have uh, essentially developer access for that. And I think they've simplified that quite a bit. So one of the things you have to do if you want to access their APIs is you have to have an API key, and that's how they were charging it. So I was actually using GPT-4 for a lot less a month. I was like maybe spending like maybe 30 cents or something like that a month on my usage, because I was just using it with the playground. But they have for $20 a month, you can get just as a user, you can access the GPT-4 model. And actually, I did both. So I have a developer account, but I also I'm getting buzzed. So I have a developer account, but I also have the full version to where I can go and use GPT-4 just in the ChatGPT window. But yeah, if you're just looking for like an inexpensive way to use GPT-4 without having to pay the $20 a month, that's one way you can actually do it.
Okay, and you could just have the same experience through the playground that you showed us that you would have in a normal like conversation with the chat app product that they offer.
Yeah. In fact, the example that I showed was that I actually I have this up on my GitHub page as well. It's where you can download this Next.js app, and there's actually a framework that Vercel makes available that works pretty well with React. So if you want to build an application like this as a React app, you can use this Vercel AI module and bring it in, and it's got all the hooks and everything built into it for working with not necessarily OpenAI, but with any large language model. So so yeah, it's like I even just for the fun of it, I actually built one is just a Mac app where it's essentially just a chat application that I built that's using a Mac window, and that's another way you can do it as well. So yeah, it's like there's all kinds of different options for being able to run these now.
Yeah, if you're a developer and can kind of you can leverage it, it sounds like, for
There's
not
something, yeah, with that Olama tool, what's cool about that is that you don't have to be a developer to use that. So you can actually just you can do like a Google search for Olama, and they'll have the instructions on how to download it for your operating system. And then you can you can run the command line. They even have like a little web version, I think, that you can spin up and run as well. So it's like you don't have to be a programmer or developer to use these tools now.
that would be good. I mean, well, if a better chat interface, then I think the Chat GPT interface for the user is a little bit lacking. One thing I noticed in Copilot is that you could actually use the up arrow to kind of go through your history and pull up previous prompts. But if you're on the Chat GPT website, they don't really have history. You can't like use up arrow to go through the history. And also, I just find after a while, like I open up a new chat each day. And so if I was gonna like kind of go back and find something that I was working on, it would be a real pain. And so I feel like the user interface could be better for the ChatGPT product on their website. It'd be cool to build something that was a little bit better, which still use the same models. The other things I was kind of wondering is so it looks like you have a developer account. Have you? I've heard that like some complaints, reading, looking around on Twitter or the internet, people complain about the pricing of ChatGPT, that you're paying by tokens, and that when you're actually writing apps, that this becomes kind of like cost prohibitive very quickly to build like an app for public consumption on top of the Open API model, ChatGPT APIs. Do you end up paying? Have you ever like had a big bill from OpenAI, or is that your experience with it, or what?
It's usually been really, really low. Like it's never exceeded, like it might have been like over $1 one month, just when I was playing around with it quite a bit. But one of the things I've been careful about is, like, for instance, I was talking about the embeddings. That's one of the ways they get you with their pricing.
Yeah.
So if you have, let's say, a library with the documents, and you want to store all that in let's say a vector database, what it's going to do is it's going to go out to OpenAI servers, and it's going to give you all those embeddings. But for every word, every token that you have, there's like, I think it's like 0.04 or 004, I forget what the exact pricing is for it, and it's going to vary based off of which model you're using. If you're using GPT 3.5, it's a lot less expensive than GPT-4, but it's a lot, it's not as good as 4, obviously. So what people will do is they'll go out and they'll create all these embeddings and then store them into a vector database. But even if you've never used that data, right, you've paid to get all of it processed by OpenAI, right? So there's expenses right there. You may be processing or creating embeddings for things that you're never going to use. And so a better approach to that is to actually use one of the open source embedding frameworks, which will create an embedding that's not going to be an OpenAI embedding. But what you can do is you can use that for your own cosine-based search, and you can return just back the text you need for, let's say, a RAG application, and then you can pass that in the prompt to OpenAI, and you wind up spending a lot less money that way. So that's one alternative. Another alternative is just to spin up your own servers. But what'll be interesting to see, like, I have not seen like a rundown of, like, let's say, okay, we want to run Olama or Llama as a service on a server, right? And you want to have users that are using that. How many users can you actually scale out to on a single, let's say 1U enclosure, right? And do you have, what type of there's a whole new cloud service that's launching. There's companies now that are offering, oh, you can run your open source LLM on our servers, and we've got these GPUs, but how much is that going to cost? There's a cost with that as well. So if you, let's say you want to go and fine tune a model, let's say you take one of these Llama based models and you want to fine tune it, right? That takes processing power to do that. It takes electricity, CPU cycles, GPU cycles. So there's a cost associated with that. So the example I saw, like, if you want to train like just a very low end large language model, just electricity is going to cost you about $100,000. So yeah. So I think what one of the things that OpenAI and Microsoft are working on is how to value engineer this so that it's reasonably expensive. I mean, it's going to be, there's a cost associated, but it'll be a reasonable cost that you have to pay. And then there's things that I was doing before, like creating your own embeddings, which can bring the value proposition down.
Yeah, so if you were talking about just like creating those embeddings, if you were going to ingest like a 10,000 word book and create those embeddings, if they're charging you 0.004 cents, like that's the embeddings alone are going to cost several $100s, I guess.
Potentially, yeah.
It sounds like, yeah. So if you were, so I think that demo was with I saw one script you ran that had dependencies on Llama and OpenAPI. Was that the one where did you use like the Llama library to create the embeddings, or which library were you using?
So I used OpenAI for my LangChain examples. But for the command line tool that I used, and also for the LM Studio, I used open source Llama models for that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's the one I was thinking of, the LangChain and OpenAI script. I wasn't exactly certain why what was the interaction between those two.
Yeah, I use that mainly because it's probably the easiest to set up. There's the most examples of that are also using OpenAI, but for next month, I'm planning on using some different large language models with LangChain.
I saw that and this might be related to LangChain. I was on, I was following a lot of this news on Twitter, and I still check Twitter occasionally to see what the latest stuff is going on in this area. But somebody was doing agents, essentially, like they would do, they would use large language models and kind of tell it what it wanted to do, like, I want an agent to go check like flight prices, like airline ticket prices every morning at a certain time. And then I think they were using LangChain and maybe something else. It would essentially create an agent on their local computer that would go out and do whatever kind of simple task they asked of it. Have you done anything like that in that area?
I have. I was talking before about where I created my own GPT. I created a GPT called I think CFI GPT is the name of the GPT, and it's an aviation related. I went ahead and I trained it on a lot of aviation related data. But one of the things I also did was I created a set of functions that you could use. And I have a post on how to do this if you want to take your APIs and make them available to GPT. I have a blog post describing how to do that.
Okay.
And so one of the things, student pilots want to know is like, well, I want to fly from Jacksonville down to Daytona Beach tomorrow. It's like, what's the weather going to be like? So I have these weather APIs that I've made available. So what I'll do is when the student asks that question, it'll go and it'll fetch the weather data from that service and then make recommendations based off of the weather that's coming back. But there's also something called Auto GPT. I've seen some pretty neat examples of that, and essentially that's an example of an agent. So you can give this agent instructions, and what I'll do is I'll go through and it will just keep on looping through until it gets the results that it wants.
Yeah, I think that's the one I was thinking about, Auto GPT. The weather app sounds cool though. I guess final kind of questions, save the fun ones for last. The whole OpenAI Sam Altman thing, and Sam having to step down and coming back to the board, and there's some concern of like they were moving too fast or creating things. Like one theory or mentioned that they had created a model that could do logic problems in mathematics, and maybe that there was like some concerns that this thing was so powerful that it was coming up with ways of breaking certain mathematical like encryption techniques or something like that along those lines. And I was wondering if you had any theories about this whole Sam Altman debacle and him coming back.
Not so much theories. I've just read a lot. There's been a lot of really good reporting in the Wall Street Journal and some other publications about what happened with that. And I don't think it was so much about advancements that were done in the model. There was a board member who's no longer at OpenAI. So the corporate structure of OpenAI is set up to be a nonprofit. And so what they did was, so they could attract employees and stuff, they created a for-profit division that operates underneath the main or underneath the nonprofit. And so they had a board member who I think she'd written a piece about AI safety in some publication, and it got back to Sam Altman, and Sam Altman confronted her about it and said, "Hey, you should," because she was critical of OpenAI in her piece, and he came back and he was critical. He said, "It's like, hey, you shouldn't be writing negative things about that's not good corporate due diligence." To badmouth the company that you're a board member for, and so she kind of like fought him on that, and then he went and was trying to get her fired, and so at that point, I think they only had like there's only 6 board members, including Sam Altman and the president, and so they removed one of the board members from the board, fired Sam Altman, and then there was only 4 board members left, right? And 2 of them, actually, I'd say 3 of them. One of the remaining was Ilya Setskivy. I'm trying to remember his last name, but he's a chief scientist for OpenAI, and I think he was the one that actually told Sam Altman that he was being fired. The other 3 should not have been on that board at all. And I think one of them still remains, but 2 of the others were let go. So there's a lot of corporate intrigue. I think a lot of people were curious about what was going on behind the scenes, because here's this company that grew from nothing to, I mean, as far as users, to millions of users overnight. I think it's the fastest growing internet website as a service ever. And you've got this company that's had this unbelievable success, and they just launched all these new features, and then 2 weeks later they fire the CEO, and everybody's going, "What the heck's going on?" But it was kind of it was more corporate intrigue than anything else. I don't think it had anything to do. I mean, they're clearly they have stuff they're working on that they haven't shown yet. But I don't think that that really played that big of a deal. There's other stuff that Sam Altman is doing, like he has these other companies that he's trying to start up at the same time. I think he's working on a chips company to make a chip specifically for AI-based devices. So I think that probably played a little bit more into it than some super intelligence or AGI they might have developed at OpenAI.
Okay, yeah. So the theory from the Wall Street Journal is just like political infighting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one other thing I forgot. This was probably my last one. So, there's a marketplace in ChatGPT from like the consumer point of view. You can go in and select like I want to use these plugins in my ChatGPT session. And have you done anything with the ChatGPT plugin marketplace? Is there are people getting compensated from that? Is there any way to make any like money or generate any users of your plugin, maybe for profit there?
So I'm not really sure how the payout is. I mean, it's in theory, you should be able to do it. But just as an example here, I have this. This is the GPT that I created. It's available on there now. But to see how easy this is, I can come right over here, right? And I could say, let's see here, how do you do this?
Yeah, that's where it normally is for me. It says you could select like a checkbox that says plugins,
You
and
hit
then actually
explore,
select
yeah.
a plugin. Yeah.
So you come right here, just as an example, and you can create your own GPT. So if I come over here, you can actually have a chat conversation with it. You can upload documents to give it more information. But if you come over here to configure, this is what's really cool, is they have these actions right here. And so you can come over here to action, and then you can put in basically, you can give it a schema or import in from a URL, different functions and stuff that you want to make available. And then if you have good descriptions of what those functions do, it will go out and call those functions to be able to answer that. And I'd suggest that anybody, if they want to come here, you can just go here, explore GPTs, and they have all kinds of different GPTs here. They've got a data analyst, a Dolly, of course. a bunch of image generators, writing assistants, productivity assistants, research and analysis. They've got all kinds of stuff that's in here. So my suggestion is if you're looking to see what you can do, just take a look at examples of what people have already done with this. But this,
Interesting. So if I was like, I'm working on a project where I'm like scraping web data for a friend, and if I wanted to just give him a chat interface so he can come to ChatGPT and use a plugin and say, hey, is there any new data changes today on the website? Yeah, I could apply my scraping functions inside that schema and describe them, and the model would go out and call those APIs on the internet.
yes, yes. So
Wow.
you can pre-train it with like you can scrape data and pre-train it, or you can make functions available that have gone out and pre-trained it as well.
Yeah, they're
The-
also rolling out within a normal chat GPT prompt, you can now invoke different GPTs in one prompt. So you can call a specific GPT and it will, if you're later on in your prompt, you've been going through, you can actually, it will understand the context of your situation. So you can, because normally before you would have a GPT and then it would create its own prompt. But now you can create a single prompt and then have multiple GPTs in it as well. This is just brand new, announced within the last couple of days, and it's rolling out right now. I just checked. I just got access to it myself. But it's amazing just the rapid evolution that's happening before our very eyes.
Yeah, I saw that the other day. You've got to pre-pin the AMP and tell it what plugin you try to talk to, and then I guess that's the model that answers your questions, or that's a plugin that answers you.
Yeah. So and then yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and you have to be careful because they have plugins and then they have GPTs. So those are separate things. But they're they have like those both of those products. The GPTs is the newer product that they offer, but they still have those plugins. One of them being was being Bing. Being a search with use Chat GPT with Bing is that you can have that. But they also have the actual GPTs, but then they have the plugins as well. So they're two
Okay.
distinct products.
So the plugins are something that you kind of have to pre-select for that chat session. I've noticed you can just add whichever ones you want, but the GPTs you can just add whatever GPT you want inside your conversation without even pre-selecting it.
Yeah, so that's like
Yeah.
a new phenomena, but yeah, so before you just would have to go to like the GPT and then kind of have your own like conversation with that, but now you can now have multiple GPTs in a single prompt, and so using
Hmm.
the at symbol. So yeah.
Okay, so if I was to like create a new GPT, I I'm a little bit confused now. Where David was showing the schema for the function calls, that
Yeah,
was part of the GPT
Yeah.
functionality or part of
Yep.
the plugin
That's
functionality?
GPT.
that's GPT.
Oh, okay. So I could go and like say, hey, my friend Rourke, I created this GPT that's going to allow you to check data on this handful of websites that we want to scrape every day. You can just add John's GPT and ask it, is there any new data today? And it could tell him inside the chat session.
As long as it's published.
Huh.
You have you can either publish, you can make it available privately for just yourself. You can make it private with a link only, and then you can actually publish it to the public so it's on their GPT store.
Okay, cool.
I haven't got any checks yet.
Oh, well, that's a good thing you got that new job then.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Good, cool. Thank you, David.
Okay.
And thanks everyone.
Thanks for your questions. So we're at time. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I just wanted us to put it out there that we're a little bit over time. But David, if you have any more any few more minutes. If you want to maybe take a couple more questions, it's up to you.
Actually, I need to cut it at this point. I've got my phone's been ringing off the hook. Oh, I need to get caught up on some other stuff. But I was certainly enjoyed doing the presentation.
Yeah,
So.
thank you so much. This is very valuable. I couldn't have a better person presenting our first meeting under our new branding, our new vision. And so this is a great overview of everything. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your insight. So thank you so much.
All right.
All right, I'll stop recording as well.